Welcome to Built on Air, a podcast and video series about all things Airtable. Each episode, we will talk with someone active in the Airtable community to discuss their experiences and showcase an interesting way they've used Airtable in their work. We want to thank our sponsor, OpenSide. OpenSide's newest product, Onto Air Forms, is the Airtable form solution that you've been looking for. Visit openside.com to see how you can take your Airtable workflow to the next level. For a limited time, get Onto Air Forms free when you purchase the Onto Air Action Zapier connector. Finally, visit BuiltOnAir.com to sign up for the Built on Air mailing list, where you can get weekly updates on the new podcast episodes and other fun Airtable news. This week's guest is Kamille Parks, an urban planner and an architecture firm in Los Angeles. Her work involves ideation and planning for historical and transportation projects all throughout the city. Although Camille works on various projects at a time, and often those projects take years to complete, this episode we get a great look into what an average day looks like for her and how Airtable plays a role in making it happen. She shares tips on how to automate her work, as well as a personal Airtable to help her plan her meals.
This is a base I made in Airtable, of course, and I chose this base to demo because it, I think, best exemplified some of my problem-solving adventures I've had with Airtable. Problem solving I wouldn't consider a hobby, but it more or less is my hobby. I code in my spare time, and that is nothing but problem solving, and it's just something I've become so used to. And when I say problem solving, in this case, I mean I didn't really grow up cooking a lot, so I moved out, I'm living on my own, so it's a lot of me being responsible, right? I have to cook for myself, I have to be prepared, and I'm a working professional, so I don't have a bunch of time anymore. So I thought, okay, if I'm a little bit more organized and have a bunch of recipes that I like to cook, it'll go much simpler. What's the first step to that is collecting recipes that I like. And what better way to do that than a database? So I made a database. And then it was from there pretty simple. I'm sure many people have made meal planner databases with Airtable, but for me, it was the little extra step to make things easier over time. So there's actually an Integromat scenario that's tied to this base that helps me input recipes a little quicker. And then there's a couple formulas to get ingredients to just to display pretty, which is entirely unnecessary, but I thought it looked cool, so I did it. So I guess I can just walk around the base and see what it looks like generally.
Perfect.
So you'll see a couple of these are missing photos, but that's fine. I'll be adding them later. Pretty simple. I added notes for each recipe. I'll just choose baked potato because it's really simple. Tags, of course, to help me filter. This link here is linking to a form that is pre-filled with, I want to add ingredients related to this baked potato recipe in order to get things to list properly. And then instructions. So I've seen one of the more popular requests for Airtables to have checklists or numbered lists as like a field type.
Yeah.
And for things like this, it would be entirely relevant and super convenient. It's not yet a feature. So there's also in the Integromat scenario, it will format this for me. So it's, pretty simple, step one in brackets, but it keeps it consistent and helps me more easily visually differentiate what step is what step, with it all being in one field. Mm-hmm. And then I keep track of where I get the recipe from, so I'm not stealing from anyone. And then I've also tied this to the actual meal planner portion. of this space. So if I go over to meals, I can plan for each day, breakfast, lunch, dinner, what am I making? And it helps me understand how long I have leftovers for. And so I'm not cooking every single day, saving money that way. And that kind of ties into the recipe ingredients sheet or table, which is a junction table, which ties together recipes and meals. You could input all your recipe ingredients into just one long text field. You don't necessarily need a separate table for it, but if you wanted to be like me and have like a shopping list generated for you for whatever meal is planned that week, having a separate table is basically crucial. So you can, and I think I could actually show that here. If I go to meals and say, for tomorrow, I want to make this chicken fried rice recipe, right? I added it to my dinner meal for tomorrow. So if I go over to ingredients and go into my shopping list view, which filters based on whether or not these ingredients are in a recipe that is used this week.
Nice.
This will automatically populate with the ingredients that I need to go pick up. And I have a separate field called in pantry. So, I mean, I know I already have salt and pepper in my apartment, for instance. So I can completely ignore this. So I'll hide this group here, and then I can just focus on getting eggs and whatnot. This is very useful if I have, say, even more recipes that I want to cook that week. And now the problem with demoing is that I have to find a recipe that I know will have the same ingredient.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm not sure if this is going to work exactly how I want it to show, but the idea here is that it will add together all of the ingredients. So if, say, like for instance, I chose one that had chicken as a ingredient and the other one said chicken thighs, but you get the idea.
Right. Yeah. So you can get that full, which is also a great way too, because I'm always, when I'm making shopping lists, I'm like, oh, well, this, I only need half a pound of beef, but what else could I make, right? That has, that I use the other half for. So this is kind of a great, you can get that running total, or just, see the synergy between your shopping smarter, not more frequently. I love it.
Yeah. And then there's pretty simple, I tried organizing them, the different ingredients by what aisle they'll probably be in. And so far it's been working pretty well for me. Just when I'm shopping around, I just click the check mark and it goes away. For mobile viewing, it's not as intuitive because there's only certain views that are available if you're on the mobile app. And you can't really view by grouped items. So that's on my wish list. But other than that, so far so good. It does let you sort by whether or not this checkbox is checked. So, that's my other way around of doing this while I'm at the grocery store.
Right. Very cool. So tell us a little bit more for our listeners who may not be quite as familiar with Integromat. It's, an API automation builder, pretty similar to Zapier, but maybe you could walk us through sort of the process that you have, adding a new recipe, right, is when that sort of automation takes place. So,
okay. So this is in one of my pro bases. So I get to use blocks. So I actually have the form embedded on the side. So if I'm in the base, I can just add a recipe from here. So this is linking together my Airtable account with my Cognito Forms account. And I chose Cognito Forms because you can have these sort of field sections, which let you quickly add multiples of many fields. So if I have a recipe with many ingredients, I can add more than one ingredient. Now, there's a bunch of fields associated with that because I might have maybe 1 ounce of parsley, right? All three of those are important things to note. But then I also have what I call qualifiers. So if I wanted to note that, like, you wouldn't peel parsley, but chopped is on here. So make sure you chop the parsley. So that's another thing that I wanted to keep track of. Again, this could all be one field. However, it would be more difficult for my shopping list table to work that way. So keeping the important part is to have quantity as a standalone number field, and that allows basically the rest of this to work. So Cognito Forms, I highly recommend. It's free. I'm sure there's a pro account where you can pay for more features or for more data, but for my purposes, it works pretty well. Same thing with Integromat. You can do, I forget the number of actions it will perform in a month without additional charge, but because it's just for my personal use, I don't need it to run every single second of the day. It's just whenever I know I've added a recipe, I'll go in and say run now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have it as a tab, and I'll walk through my Integromat scenario in a second. So this form is pretty simple. The basic individual portions of these recipes coincide with all of these fields here. Recipe steps, making it one of these repeatable form field sections. Like I can add step 1, step 2, step 3. That is what allows Integromat to format these like this. So step 1, pulling from this field, it's always preceded by that. And then this is an incremented field. I think it's what it's called in Integromat, where it'll just say, I know this is the second box, so I'll put a 2 here. I know this is a third box, I'll put a 3 here.
Nice.
So if I go over to this tab, this is my Integromat scenario. And this is what the user interface for Integromat looks like. It might be confusing, I think, for someone who hasn't used it before, and it does look pretty different from Zapier.
Yeah, it is
but
a little bit. Yeah.
They do more or less the same thing. I just happen to prefer Integromat.
Right. Yeah.
So,
and I think, like you said, for personal use too, right? It is, you do get kind of, more free actions, right, out of Integromat. So even though I think it's not quite as user friendly as Zapier, it's still like a great, like you said, personal choice for stuff, because you're not like quite so worried about having everything, like having great support and having everything laid out and whatever. You can just set it up and run it whenever you want.
Right. So I'll walk through this and try to explain it as it goes along, because it does use Integromat's iterators, which took me quite a while to understand. They're a little bit tricky. So what this is doing is if I click this button, run once, it will look for any recent form submissions from that recipe form. Then what it will do is for each of, basically for each one of these recipe steps, it will iterate, which means it will loop through each of them and kind of record them. Now this tools module will start to put one after another and kind of combine them all together, because they are all separate fields, but what they're going into and the final product is one field. So it's going to be looping through each one of those recipe steps, composing a string by preceding it with bracket, step, whatever the number is, end bracket, and then the actual recipe step. And then it will add all of those groups. Step 1, whatever the text is, step 2, whatever the text is, put that all into one long text. So that's what this is. And you can see this gray sort of background. That is Integromat's way of saying, basically stop iterating here and then continue on doing things just once as opposed to 10 times. So once everything, all my recipe steps are added and put together, it will begin to create the recipe field in Airtable, which will go in the recipes table. So it will add all of the basic form fields like recipe name, recipe notes, calories per serving, all of these things that just have one entry to them. It will be added, and it will add this aggregated recipe step box as well. Now there's another iterator over here because I have the recipe ingredients portion of my base. So then what it will do, it will loop through each of these and create its own separate Airtable record in the recipe ingredients base. So a little bit complicated because it's creating anywhere from like 10 to 15 Airtable records each time I click this run once button, because I might have, 9 to 14 ingredients and then the one recipe they're all linked to.
Right.
So I'll just open up this last one to kind of show if it will load. Hopefully it'll load.
But yeah, Integromat, I think it really does do iterations and looping a little bit better than Zapier. So it's great to kind of see it laid out visually like this.
Yeah.
Especially when, right, it's so easy to understand the concept, right, of, hey, there's a recipe with multiple ingredients, but who knows how many, like go through all of them. It's such a great sort of concrete example to show that too.
Right. That's why I picked this base, because I think it shows Airtable is great and you can do a lot with it, but there's nothing wrong with using some of these partners that they have to add to it and to make it a little bit, it work better for you. So the beauty of Integromat and Zapier is that you only have to figure this out once, and then it'll just do things for you. So that's going back to what I said about problem solving. That's, what I consider fun about building databases.
For sure. Yeah, you're right. Like, how can I do a little bit more work now so I can be lazier later?
Yeah.
That's how I think of it. Yeah.
That's my skill in life.
For sure.
So just going through this last step in Integromat where it's building, you'll see it's adding a new record to the recipe ingredients table. It's taking the ID for the recipe once associated with it from this. This is where it creates the recipe Airtable record. So it's saying for each of these new recipe ingredients that are being iterated from this module, associate them with that recipe from step 24. That's another thing that's nice about this user interface. You'll see I have two things called tools, and I have two iterators, and I also have two Airtables, but they each have a number associated with them. So 19, 25, 17, it helps me very quickly understand which one I'm actually supposed to click on, and they're color-coded, which is nice.
For sure.
So, yeah.
I love it.
I think that's about it for this. This resume thing at the end is just for error handling. It just so it doesn't stop the process. It just continues on, just in case if I spelled something wrong, for instance, and Integromat gets confused as to what it's supposed to add. It'll basically just tell it to figure it out, essentially, and instead of throwing up its hands and saying, "Well, can't do it."
Right.
So,
sorry, like nothing beyond here. Right.
Yeah.
Just
continue. That was the first problem I think I ran into was because I'm using checkboxes in the form, right? These each of these options that I created in cognito forms have to be, letter for letter. That would be over here. They would have to be spelled exactly the same as what these are. So that was the first thing I had to figure out, was why am I getting all these errors? It's because I think I dropped the D in cubed. So it just said cube, and Integromat didn't know what to do. So
right. It's like, what is
adding the resume thing at the end will just let all the other recipes that don't have this problem get made, and then it'll save the one that had the error for you, so you can go back and fix it, so it's not lost in cyberspace.
For sure. And I think really also the thing that is amazing about the space is you put in a recipe, you save it here, and then you can see the steps without having to click back into the recipe link and scroll down through all of that stupid, here's my life story, this is my grandmother's favorite recipe, let me tell you about this one time that I went strawberry picking, junk, yes. Right? Just to get to the things you need to make the recipe. That drives me insane. Yeah. But I love how you just you're I'll do, you fill out the form, spend a little bit of time on that, but then you don't have to look at that link ever again if you don't want to.
Right. And then there's so many different websites and that have great recipes, and I don't want a bookmarks folder that's just covered in recipe bookmarks. And then, physical books that my dad has, and that has had for ages. They're not going to be on a website probably. So getting those in, I actually have my grandmother's recipe for macaroni in here. And obviously that's not going to be on the internet. So there you go. It's
very cool.
Yeah. Instead of having these professionally shot images for all of these, this is macaroni that I made. So
right. Yeah. Real macaroni, right? Not
but you can see, the source is my grandmother. So
I love it.
Helping me preserve that recipe, because we have, that's the next thing I need to do. She had a pancake recipe, and we wrote it down on one sheet of paper somewhere in this house. And it's torn and faded. It has maybe 2 weeks left before it evaporates into space. So I need to find that and put that in the base. So
right. And then you can be like, hey, family, don't make fun of me anymore. Look at how useful this is, right? I've saved our grandma's pancake recipe.
Exactly. So, it's, they'll be sorry. They'll be coming and running next time they want pancakes.
Right. They'll be asking you. And this is great. I love how just sort of thoughtfully laid out it is. And also it's not just, a space for you to put recipes, but you can plan in it and do a shopping list. It really has, everything you need to adult in the kitchen in one place. Mm-hmm. Very cool. So thank you so much for this demo. That was great. And now I'm inspired. I feel like I want to create one. Cause I'm always gosh, what do we have in the fridge? I'm hungry. What can I cook today? But this is amazing.
I think I might release this to the Airtable universe, because so a lot of my other bases I'm constantly improving, but this one I think I've solved all the problems that I can solve. For instance, this is taking 0.5, which I have to keep that way in order for Airtable to be able to add these together. But this is easier for my brain to read while I'm cooking. So there's this random separate formula field that is there only so things can look pretty. And it's these little things where, I'll just release this. So not everyone has to know. If I look at this, the actual formula for this looks insane, and no one should ever have to write this again.
Right. Yeah. You're I will do the conversions once for everyone. Right. No, but it's so true where you're okay, I need this field for the computer, and then I need this field for myself as a human. And you're like, okay, well, I'll build the little Rosetta Stone formula, right, that translates everything in between them. But I mean, it really does matter for sort of, just aesthetics and usability. Yeah, this is great. I love it. Thank you so much for chatting with us. It was great to not only see your wonderful problem solving recipe base, but also chat about urban planning and Photoshop boot camps and everything else you have going on. For our listeners, if you do end up publishing on Airtable Universe, we will include a link to this in the show notes so they can check it out.
Great. So thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Camille.